I give credit to Joe Buck. He's earned my respect in this postseason. I feel like he's been a little bit more animated. I've always kind of, used that against him. I have a lot of respect for him because most of the World Series I've watched growing up, I've heard his voice. And, a lot of anticlimactic reactions out of him. But I have to say this postseason, I've started to come around to him a little bit because, he seems to show a little bit more emotion. Before he's just very, high and dry, kind of just meh.
But you know what? That's his low-key personality. I mean, let's face reality. You're used to Joe Buck, and I'm used to his dad, Jack Buck.
Jack Buck. And he did, and I will give him credit for David Freese's home run in the best baseball game I ever saw, Game 6 of the 2011 World Series. He literally, 20 years after, mimicked his father when he said, "We'll see you tomorrow night."
Oh, yeah, come on. It's in the bloodlines. Although I got to tell you an interesting story before Tommy comes on. I remember working a game back in Pompano when the Cardinals took on the Texas Rangers over at Pompano Municipal Stadium. It's been long torn down since. And I was in the press box working the scoreboard because I did my part-time gig. I picked up work wherever I could get it, whether it was operating the scoreboard or writing or whatever. And I actually met Jack Buck, and he took the window out of the press box, so he could see the field better. And he got hit with a foul ball right in his right arm. Got a nice big bruise, but boy, it didn't bruise his sense of humor, that's for sure.
No, absolutely not.
That's something I got over you.
One of the most colorful and jovial characters baseball has ever seen, and did it with such a sense of professionalism. And, another one of those guys who did multiple sports too. I believe he did a lot of NFL in the 1970s as well. So, give a lot of credit to him. And you can say what you want about, Joe taking after his father and really only having a job because of his father, but I give a lot of respect to the guy. He does a lot of good work. So, again, I'm coming around to him, and his father will forever go down as one of the greatest broadcasters of all time.
Well, I'll say this before Tommy comes on the program, okay? And I don't know how many people would actually remember this, but before Jack Buck became into prominence, okay, he once did a trivia show called Grandstand. So for all you old-timers out there wondering about Jack Buck, okay, he did a show called Grandstand. And, of course, it went down. And I remember when I was growing up, there were a lot of sports quiz shows that Dick Enberg used to have. And, but you talk about the Bucks. I mean, there's a big, huge history. But you know what? I will always be partial towards my adopted uncle, Ernie Harwell.
Yeah, he grew up in the Metro Detroit area, and he was the voice of those Tigers teams going all the way back to, I believe, the 50s. So,
wow, but Ernie and I were close. He was like a family member to me. And one of these days I'll have a chance to pay tribute to Ernie more and more. But, while we have a moment or two before Mr. Michigan State, Tom Shanahan comes on.
I'm glad you mentioned Ernie Harwell because I'll never forget watching MLB Network. I believe he passed away, what was it, either 2011 or 2012, and I believe Bob Costas had him on for a segment.
Yeah, he did.
And this was right before he passed away, and Ernie kind of knew what was coming. I mean, he was in his early 90s at the time, but just to hear somebody who had seen so much great baseball reflect on his time in the game and pretty much his entire journey to where he was, I thought that was awe-inspiring. And this was around the time that I really started to contemplate the idea of becoming a sports writer. And a lot of that stuff that I saw from, the guys like Ernie Harwell and maybe and Bob Costas and maybe the guy who I'd like to borrow a lot of my cadence from the most and Matt Vescursion, who does baseball games on FS1 and works on the MLB Network and ESPN. To see that, I thought was awe-inspiring because to me, those are some of my heroes, or just people like that who kind of talk about the game that I love, and they deliver it in their own unique way that is just kind of singular to themselves.
But that's your era, and you know what? That's good because you represent the new wave.
But what I'm saying is, the appreciation I had for what the stories that Ernie discussed and talked about, it's awe-inspiring. I know I use that term already, but it's just nice to hear. Because you're essentially hearing the folk tales of the days of yore in baseball history, and I thought that was great.
Yeah, but you're bright enough to appreciate it. Most people don't have your baseball IQ mentality. They don't. And I say this not because you're sitting across the table from me, but before I hired you to work for me here, I knew exactly what you had, and that's why I enjoy being able to sit across here in the studio all the time, being able to interact about baseball and a lot of the other sports, and now you're becoming a bit more well-rounded as your responsibilities have forced you to become a bit more well-rounded. And I think that's the dynamics of what we're really trying to get accomplished anyway.
Yeah, so far, mission accomplished, I'd hope.
No, we're doing okay. I mean, every show that we continue to do things, I always pray you're going to learn more and more about different sports, but you will as time goes on. And I think that's the dynamic thing about it. With that said, we'll go from baseball over to basketball, and that's Tom Shanahan. Tom, thanks for being back on the Sports Exchange. You're with Scott Morganroth, Louis Adia Weiss, here on the Big Show. It's ACC basketball time with Mr. Spartan Tom Shanahan.
Yeah, let's talk a little basketball.
Let's do it.
Well, the top 25 came out, and as expected, Michigan State is ranked number one. They have so many players returning. That was the reason they were number one, including Cassius Winston, who is pretty much everyone's pick as a National Player of the Year, preseason pick. Kentucky is number two, Kansas is number three, and Duke is number four. And what's interesting about that 1, 2, 3, 4 grouping is those are the four schools that play annually in the Champions Classic that moves around the country. This year it's November 5th at Madison Square Garden, and you'll have Duke playing in the first game, Duke number 4 against Kansas number 3, and then in the nightcap you got Michigan State number 1 against Kentucky number 2. So kind of convenient how that worked out for the Champions Classic.
It's amazing, isn't it? Okay, so we talked about the top 25. Any surprises in that?
One surprise I would say is Louisville number 5. That's awfully high, I think. Although, they've got a good coach and they do have some talent, so maybe I don't know what I'm talking about. But I just think that's a little bit high for Louisville. Another interesting thing, number 6, Florida. Okay. So Kentucky usually just rolls right through the SEC. The SEC is just basically a one-team conference. But Florida is getting back to where it was when Billy Donovan was there, won back-to-back NCAA titles. They're becoming a top 10 program. They got a big transfer that's making a difference this year. A kid from Kerry Blackshear from Virginia Tech. He was a great player for Virginia Tech. In fact, he gave Duke a lot of trouble. Virginia Tech came close to beating Duke. And Blackshear is one of those senior transfers who has taken advantage of the graduate transfer rule. He's immediately eligible. It came down to Michigan State and Florida, and he picked Florida.
Interesting. Very interesting. So, all right, let's look ahead to the Champions Classic. The only thing I say about Sparty, and this is a credit to Tom Izzo more than anything else, is he doesn't mind scheduling the big opponents early in the year. Sometimes, sometimes I look at wins and losses a bit more skewed in college basketball because of the amount of weaker opponents that are scheduled. Not that every sport, Tom, doesn't do it, okay, but more so, I think, in college basketball. But Tom Izzo is not one of those individuals who's afraid to schedule these marquee matchups early.
Yeah, he's always been that way. And part of it was, when he replaced Judd Heathcote and he brought in Mateen Cleaves, who was the foundation for their eventual national championship team. He was trying to build more interest in the program, higher profile. And so they scheduled games at North Carolina. They weren't afraid to do that. And he's continued that philosophy. Even down to when Judd Heathcote retired, he went back home to the state of Washington and Spokane, where he's from, where his family is from, grandchildren and all that. And, Gonzaga is a great program. And Izzo would take Michigan State out to Gonzaga just so, as a favor to his old boss.
Right.
Not a lot of guys would take their team to the backyard, to the arena of a powerful program like Gonzaga. So, yeah, he's always had that attitude. He'll take on anybody.
Yeah, well, let me ask you a question. You're in the ACC. Don't some coaches go ahead and use that as a recruiting way where if you come to us, I'll make sure we schedule a game in your hometown so you can play in front of the family? I thought, didn't Dean Smith used to do that?
Yeah, Dean was famous for that. But, that was before so many games were on TV.
Right.
I don't know if that's important as it is now to recruits as it used to be, because recruits are more willing to transfer, or not transfer, but just go anywhere across the country to play for a top team than maybe they were back in the 70s and 80s.
Right.
But, yeah, Dean Smith always made that promise to a player. If he brought him a long way from home, that he would schedule a game near their hometown.
Yeah, I mean, I like it personally. I think it's good. I mean, to think of a marquee program playing in your backyard in front of fans, I think it's pretty good. me personally.
Yeah, the coach that probably doesn't do that does it the least, is Duke and Coach K. You know, he gets a lot of criticism for never playing a tough road game, kind of like Alabama football. They never play a road game at an opponent's Power Five's stadium. They want to always be at a neutral stadium. So Coach K has Duke in a lot of tournaments, and they'll play teams in Chicago and things like that. But he rarely takes his team on the road to face a quality program until they get into ACC play.
Yeah, but you know the difference between college football and basketball, though, is these guaranteed games, and these teams that are so much worse get that guaranteed paycheck. And as I always like to say, Tom, the inventory just isn't as high in football as it is in basketball. But yeah, I think also in basketball you're right, there are more tournaments around the country. What do you have them in the Bahamas? You have Hawaii. I think they have the Maui Classic, and they have them in the Bahamas. I mean, I imagine the Thanksgiving tournaments. You know, so you've got a lot more neutral site games. I think more so. I'm not talking about the bowl games. I'm just talking about in general in college basketball that you can move them around. You have games in Alaska too, don't you, Tommy?
Yeah.
Right,
they've had a couple of tournaments up there.
Right. So, you know, I mean, but I can see your point. All right. So we're talking about these exhibition games. Are there certain exhibition games that you think stand out that we should be looking for?
Not really. They're all, designed for as far as the top 25 teams. They're going to blow out whoever they play. But what is interesting about Duke is about 10 years ago, Coach K was watching the Division II National Championship game on TV. You know, his team was in the NCAA tournament somewhere. I guess they had a day off, and the Division II game came on TV, and he was watching it. And he really got caught up in all the emotion and spirit that's genuine. You know, there's no money, no big-time NBA draft picks on these teams. These guys are playing for the love of the game. And so he came up with the idea that he was going to invite the Division II champion every year to come to Cameron Indoor Stadium for an exhibition game. And so this is the 10th year he's been doing it. This year the team is Northwest Missouri State.
Really?
Yeah, and as you can imagine, these kids are used to playing in Division II gyms, not in Cameron Indoor Stadium, where they've seen Duke play a million times on TV. So they all walk in with their mouths wide open and their eyes wide open, and it's quite an experience that Coach K is happy to provide for them. I give him a lot of credit for that.
I give you a lot of credit for bringing that up. I think that is pretty cool stuff. So, all right, let's talk about the Champions Classic altogether. You have the top four teams. Why don't you size up the Duke versus Kansas matchup first before we graduate with MSU against Kentucky?
Well, I'm expecting Duke to be pretty good this year. What I expect? I expect it to be more fun to watch. Last year, they kind of boiled down into one-on-one play between R.J. Barrett and Zion Williamson.
Right.
You know, those guys were just so far head and shoulders above everybody else that they just kept pounding the ball to those guys. And the offense, if they weren't hitting their three-pointers, the offense could get really stagnant and boring to watch. Now, I expect Trey Jones to be more of a pure point guard. He was one of the four freshmen that came in last year, and he came back for his sophomore year. He knew he wasn't ready for the NBA. Part of the reason being is he had both a hip and shoulder injury during the course of the season. So I'm not sure he was ever 100% after, say, January, when he first got hurt. But I expect him to distribute the ball like his brother Tyus Jones did when he led them to the 2015 national title. And there won't be just two guys demanding the ball all the time. So I think they're going to be more balanced and more fun to watch. That's what I expect anyways.
Now, I know Kansas has been under scrutiny for things off the court. And I think that Bill Self's reputation, obviously he's won championships and he's had a lot of success on the court. But do you think that with some of the off-the-field issues that the Kansas program is going to be looked upon differently now than it has been in the past, knowing a lot of the off-the-court transgressions that have taken place?
Yeah, I don't think there's any doubt about it. Look at Arizona. Do you look at Arizona the same way?
Oh, yeah.
I think we'll start seeing that in Kansas, too.
Yeah.
Kansas, we're going to have to kind of wait and see how their players react. You know, Sylvia D'Souza was at the center of all the controversy, and we don't know how